This video is dedicated to the decisive role of the RAF Spitfire fighter plane, in particular during the Battle of Britain in 1940. Every effort has been made to restore, enhance and colorize existing black and white film footage to the highest possible video quality using the latest video software. This is not AI generated slop, but based on real, original footage. The summer and autumn of 1940 stand as a defining epoch in modern history. As the shadows of the Third Reich stretched across the European continent, only the English Channel and the pilots of the RAF stood between Hitler's war machine and the total subjugation of Western Europe. This air campaign, known as the Battle of Britain, was the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air. At the heart of this struggle was a machine that transitioned from a technological gamble to a national icon, the Supermarine Spitfire. The Spitfire did not begin as a weapon of war, but a pursuit of pure speed. Its designer, Reginald J. Mitchell, was a man obsessed with streamlining. Drawing from the work on his S-Series seaplanes that won the Schneider Trophy, Mitchell sought to create a fighter that defied the drag-heavy biplane traditions of the early 1930s. The Spitfire's most striking feature was its elliptical wing. This was a masterstroke of aerodynamic engineering. By adopting this shape, Mitchell achieved the thinnest possible wing profile while maintaining enough internal volume to house retractable landing gear and, crucially, a heavy battery of 8 machine guns. This wing provided the Spitfire with a superior lift-to-drag ratio, allowing it to outturn almost any contemporary opponent. While the airframe was Mitchell's masterpiece, the Spitfire's soul was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. This liquid-cooled V12 engine provided the massive horsepower required to propel the Spitfire to speeds exceeding 360 miles per hour. The marriage of Mitchell's airframe and the Rolls-Royce engine created a platform that was not just fast, but exceptionally responsive to a pilot's touch. The Spitfire was manufactured by Supermarine Aviation Works, owned by Vickers Armstrong. Manufacturing plants were at Woolston and at the Itchen River near Southampton. Manufacturing the Spitfire was problematic. Because of its complex curved surface and revolutionary construction, it was notoriously difficult to mass produce. Unlike the Hawker Hurricane, which used traditional fabric over frame construction that any furniture maker could assist with, the Spitfire required high precision metalworking. On the 4th of August 1938, the first operational Spitfire was delivered. In 1938 and 1939, production lagged dangerously behind schedule. William Maxwell Aitken, Lord Beaverbrook, later the Minister of Aircraft Production, would eventually have to decentralize manufacturing into shadow factories, being garages, bus depots and small workshops across England, also with the aim to protect the supply chain from German bombing. He slashed bureaucracy and took direct control of factories like Castle Bromwich to fix inefficiencies. When the Battle of Britain officially commenced on the 10th of July 1940, the RAF was the underdog. The Luftwaffe possessed a battle-hardened force of nearly 2,500 aircraft, while RAF Fighter Command could muster only about 600 serviceable fighters, of which about 250 Spitfires and 350 Hurricanes. The Spitfire production was rapidly increased, with orders of around 1,000 in 1939 to 4,500 at its peak in 1943. Between 1938 and 1948, 20,355 Spitfires were produced. Let us take a look at what flying a Spitfire was like. The Supermarine Spitfire was designed and operated almost exclusively as a single-seater fighter during World War II. RAF pilots, particularly during the Battle of Britain, were not exclusively upper class. While some were from wealthy backgrounds, a significant portion were middle or working class, often entering as sergeant pilots. Here we see the Spitfire's rather complicated cockpit. When flying over the sea, pilots were equipped with a lifebelt, unkindly to the buxom actress nicknamed a Mae West. They also always carried a parachute, which served as a cushion on the pilot's seat. For high altitude warmth, pilots often wore the Irving sheepskin jacket, noted for its thick fur lining. They also wore a silk scarf, not just for style, but because it prevented neck chafing from the stiff wool collars while the pilot constantly scanned the sky for enemy aircraft. Furthermore, they wore a leather helmet, like the C-type, which held the radio earphones and provided mounting points for the oxygen mask. This mask was essential for flying at altitudes above 10,000 feet. Pilots also wore goggles and a Weems-style watch for navigation and fuel management. During the Battle of Britain, the English Channel became a graveyard for aircraft and the scene of many desperate survival struggles by downed RAF and Luftwaffe pilots. The British developed the Air Sea Rescue Service, ASR, a sophisticated network of eyes and engines dedicated to one goal: the sea shall not have them. The rescue often began with the Supermarine Walrus, a quirky amphibious biplane that was able to land on choppy waters. These shagbats would patrol the channel, spotting yellow dinghies or the distinctive green dye markers released by pilots. Other types of seaplanes were also used by the RAF, like the short Sunderland seen here. Once a pilot was located, the call went out to the high-speed launches, HSLs, of the RAF Marine branch. These 63-foot wooden boats, powered by 3 Napier Sea Lion engines, were the Spitfires of the sea. Capable of speeds exceeding 35 knots, they would roar out from the coastal stations like Dover or Newhaven, often under the nose of German shore batteries. Pilots could also use radio to signal their emergency just before being downed. By 1944, this integrated system of specialized aircraft, fast boats and stationary refuges had saved over 8,000 airmen. The RAF and also the Luftwaffe deployed rescue buoys, steel chambers anchored in the channel and stocked with survival equipment including a bed. War is often defined by the fog of uncertainty, and in the early days of radar that fog was literal. Chain-home radar stations provided raw data, but it was frequently messy overlapping signals, duplicate reports and technical noise. If this raw data had been sent directly to the airfields, the result would have been chaos. Fixed antenna radar stations were placed all along Britain's east and south coast. They could detect incoming enemy aircraft within a range of up to 200 kilometers. RAF Fighter Command was the entire nervous system of Britain's defence. It was established on the 14th of July 1936. Headquartered at Bentley Priory, Fighter Command didn't just fly planes, it managed the first integrated air defense system in history. Without the organizational genius of Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, the bravery of the pilots would have been spent in vain. Fighter Command divided the United Kingdom into geographic groups, the most famous being 11 Group, which covered London and the South East. Each group had its own operations room, but they all answered to the Central Command. This hierarchy ensured that the resources could be shifted across the country as the Luftwaffe changed its targets. The Dowding system was a revolution in warfare. The role of fighter command was to manage the system. This was a 4-stage loop that happened in near real time. Stage 1, detection. Chain home radar and the observer corps spotted incoming threats. Stage 2, filtering. The filter room clarified the fog of war into actionable data. Stage 3, direction. Controllers at the group and sector levels used that data to scramble squadrons and direct them via radio to the exact intercept point. Stage 4, engagement. The pilots engaged the enemy with the advantage of height and position, and so this loop repeated itself on and on. The filter room was the essential brain of Dowding's system. Here teams of highly trained personnel, predominantly women of the WAAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, performed the feat of human computation. As plots arrived via telephone from coastal radar stations and the observer corps, they were placed on a massive map table. To some degree it looked like playing a game of tiddlywinks using marked wooden tokens. The filterer had a strenuous task. Within seconds, he or she had to, first of all, identify by cross-reference signals to determine if a flight was hostile, friendly or unknown. Second, to consolidate by merging multiple radar reports into a single accurate track. And third, to project by calculating the speed, height and heading of the incoming raid. Only once this filtered picture was clear was the information transmitted to the operations room. This allowed air officers to commit their limited resources with surgical precision. Because of the filter room, the RAF didn't have to keep planes constantly patrolling the skies. They could scramble exactly when and where they were needed. The filter room turned a series of electronic blips into a coherent story. Dowding could keep his precious few pilots on the ground resting until the last possible moment. This prevented the RAF from being worn down by exhaustion, and its omnipresence gave the impression to German attackers of encountering a much larger air force than the RAF actually was. By the end of the Battle of Britain, by September 1940, Fighter Command had proved that a sophisticated ground control defense could defeat a much larger attacking force. It was the birth of a modern air defense. There is plenty of footage to show what the scramble by RAF pilots looked like. The so-called dogfights in the sky between the Spitfires and Bf-109s could often be clearly observed from the ground. Especially the circular contrail patterns and combat noise made many people look up. Over time, the English countryside became strewn with the wreckages of shot down British and German aircraft. In mid-August 1940, the Luftwaffe launched Adlertag, Eagle Day. The objective shifted to attempting the total destruction of the RAF Fighter Command on the ground. At the time, the RAF had only just over 600 aircraft at their disposal. It was during this phase that the legendary rivalry between the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt Bf-109 reached its zenith. Tactically, the RAF began to utilize the Spitfire as a specialized interceptor. The RAF deployed the so-called high-low trap. Hurricanes were directed to attack the slow, lumbering German bombers, Heinkel HE-111s and Dornier DO-17s, whereas Spitfires were sent higher to engage the Bf-109 escorts. The Spitfire's success lay in its turning circle. A Spitfire pilot who found a Bf-109 on its tail could simply pull into a tight bank. The German fighter, with its higher wing loading, could not follow without stalling. This maneuverability saved thousands of British airmen's lives. However, the Spitfire at the beginning of the battle had a near-fatal flaw, its gravity-fed carburetor. If a pilot pushed the nose down into a steep dive, negative G-forces would flood the engine, causing it to cough and cut out. German pilots, whose engines used fuel injection, exploited this by simply diving away when in trouble. This was not fixed until 1941, when female engineer Beatrice Schilling invented a simple metal restrictor, famously known as Miss Schilling's orifice, to regulate fuel flow during negative Gs. By early September 1940, the RAF was at its breaking point. Airfields in Group 11, southeast England, were cratered, and pilot fatigue was at an all-time high. Then, a strategic blunder by the German High Command changed everything. Frustrated by the resilience of the RAF, Hitler and Göring shifted their focus from airfields to the city of London. This shift allowed the RAF time to repair its airfields and gather its strength. When the German Armada arrived, they were met by their big wing, massed formations of 3 to 5 squadrons. On September the 15th, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched 2 massive waves of bombers against the capital. The Spitfires tore into the Bf-109 fighter escorts with a ferocity that shocked the German pilots, who had been told that the RAF was down to its last 50 planes. The Spitfire's success that day was psychological as much as it was physical. It broke the Luftwaffe's belief that victory was imminent. The 15th of September 1940 has gone into history as Battle of Britain Day. It was a catastrophe for the German Luftwaffe. They failed to inflict significant damage on the RAF's infrastructure. Initially, the RAF reported to have shot down 175 enemy aircraft. Later on, the number turned out to be substantially lower at only 56, but still a huge success for the RAF. We will now address the strengths and weaknesses of the Spitfire. Strengths. High altitude performance. The Spitfire outperformed the Messerschmitt Bf-109s above 20,000 feet. As regards psychological warfare, the mere sight of the elliptical wings caused German bomber crews to panic. The airframe proved so good it remained in production and frontline service throughout the entire war. Weaknesses. The Spitfire's .303 machine guns lacked the punch to quickly down armoured bombers compared to German 20mm cannons. The Spitfire's short operational range prevented it from taking the fight to France in 1940. Initially, the combat range was about 150 miles. Slightly later, Mark I to Mark V models had a range of around 425 miles. Poor ground handling. Its narrow landing gear made it prone to ground looping on the grass airfields of England, leading to many landing accidents. The Battle of Britain did not end with a single bang, but with a gradual realization by the Germans that air superiority could not be won. By October 1940, the threat of Operation Sea Lion, being the invasion of England, was indefinitely postponed. While the Hawker Hurricanes actually shot down more aircraft during the battle, due to its higher numbers and role as a bomber killer, the Spitfire was the essential counterfighter. Without the Spitfire to keep the Bf-109s occupied, the Hurricanes would have been picked out of the sky before they ever reached the bombers. Ultimately, the RAF's victory was a triumph of technology, organization and sheer human will. Winston Churchill's famous tribute, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," was a great compliment to the pilots, but it was also a tribute to the machines they flew. The Spitfire became more than a fighter, it became the physical manifestation of British endurance and substantially contributed to surviving the Battle of Britain.